most of you have probably recognized this camera already, but this is the Pentax 6x7 medium format camera that shoots, as the name implies, a 6x7 negative on 120 film. Now this particular 6x7 is actually the Pentax 6x7 with mirror lockup, which means it's the second camera in this series of Pentax 6x7 cameras. The first version is the Pentax 6x7, then you have the Pentax 6x7 with mirror lockup, which is what this is. Then there is the Pentax 6.7, which is the newer version, and then there is the Pentax 6.7 II, which is the second version of the Pentax 6.7. Got that? Okay, so there's 4 versions: Pentax 6x7, 6x7 with mirror lockup, 6.7, and 6.7 II. So, as you've probably gathered, this camera is very big and very heavy to use. In fact, it's actually obnoxiously big and obnoxiously heavy to drag around with you anywhere. That being said, however, the ergonomics on the camera are actually pretty good in general. The shutter winder is in a good spot, it's easy to use. It's a single stroke camera, by the way. A couple of the larger medium format cameras do tend to be double stroke. Different strokes for different folks. The shutter lock is very solid, and it's very difficult to accidentally unlock the shutter and waste a frame that way. The shutter speed dial on the opposite of the camera is nice, it's solid, it has good hard stops for each shutter speed, while also being quite difficult to accidentally bump and change the shutter speed as well. So overall, the ergonomics of the camera are okay. There's 2 major faults, however, with this camera. One is that by default, there's no grip really on the camera, it's just sort of a smooth surface. You might be asking about what this thing is on the side. That is actually an aftermarket grip my friend added to this camera. I don't know where he got it. It's some sort of thing that you can get made or order somewhere. I don't know. Go ask him if you want to know where to get it. I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel down below. Now, when it comes to using this camera, there's 2 very important tricks you need to know. One is that the camera can't actually fire without film in it. The winder just does nothing. But there is a way to trick the camera into thinking there's film so you can dry fire the camera and test it. And to do that, we need to open the back of the camera. You pull down a little silver tab here which releases the back, and then it opens up just like a normal kind of 35mm SLR, except it's a lot bigger and heavier and shoots 120. And then with the back of the camera open, you kind of push your thumb down on the top of the frame counter and you can rotate it into a position past 0, and then you close the back of the camera, and now the camera thinks it has film in it. So when you wind it, there's more tension in the winder, so you can cock the shutter and you can dry fire the camera. I actually have to hold the camera away from my microphone a little bit because the mic was clipping on the recording, and that is because this camera has one of the loudest but the most beautiful goddamn orgasmic shutter sounds ever to exist. It's just something elegant about the shutter sound on this camera. Oh, that shutter sound, man, it is beautiful. And one of the disadvantages of this shutter is that it's very big. There's a big mirror in there slapping up and down, which introduces a lot of vibration into this camera. In fact, when you shoot it, you can actually feel the shutter moving. You can feel the slap of the mirror. So it's very easy to get camera shake and to get blurry photos if you're hand holding this camera. Now, the easiest way to fix that is just to shoot with a really high shutter speed. When I'm shooting with the 105 here, I tend to try and get 125th or 250th of a second or greater shutter speeds in order to prevent the mirror slap from shaking the camera too much. But that's not the big ergonomic problem. That is reserved for this cursed little mirror lockup switch on the side by the lens, because it is super easy to accidentally hit this mirror lockup switch, which will immediately flip the mirror up, and then you cannot release the mirror without taking a picture. So if you accidentally hit the switch, you end up wasting a frame. And when you've got a camera that only takes 10 frames a roll, wasting a frame is kind of a big deal and a major annoyance of using this camera. To be honest, I really dislike this camera's ergonomics. It's okay, but my God, it's infuriating. That mirror lockup switch is just so goddamn irritating. The camera is just, in general, it's kind of a clown camera. It's too big, it's too heavy, it doesn't fit in any of my bags. So for me, this camera is just like a not even rate out of 10 in terms of ergonomics. But now we got to talk about the most important thing, the optics. So I've spent the last few minutes talking about a lot of the problems with this camera, mainly due to the size and weight and kind of just clownness of it. Let's talk about the good points. And the good points come in the form of these, the lenses and optics that are available for this camera. And we're going to start with the super multi-coated Takumar 105mm f2.4. And there's no other way of saying this. This lens is an absolute god tier lens. Now I don't know what magic Pentax put into this lens, but it does result in some of the most beautifully rendered pictures being kicked out of the back of the lens and onto the film that you're shooting. The only way I can describe it is that it renders space in such an elegant way. You know, depth information is preserved really well, and it just has a look to it that I've never really seen on another lens. It's also very sharp, and because of that fast f2.4 aperture on a 6x7 negative, you can get some crazy shallow depth of field as well. However, there is a big downside to this lens, and that is the fact that it uses thorium glass in its optical construction. Now, the reason you would use thorium glass in a lens is because the glass has a very high refractive index, which allows for different optical designs to be used, and that's probably why this lens is so goddamn good. The big downside of using thorium glass is that this lens is lightly radioactive. Now, in terms of danger and radioactive level, the only way you could possibly get injured by this lens is if you took the elements out of it, crushed them up and snorted the glass, which wouldn't exactly be a good idea, or if you took the elements out and like strapped it to your skin and just wore it stuck to your arm for weeks and weeks or months on end. The amount of radiation that actually comes off this is incredibly low. You would get a lot more, you actually get dosed with a lot more radiation if you take a long haul flight. So in terms of actual danger, the lens is actually just perfectly safe to use. But as good as the 105 is, it's not the only lens I was able to borrow for this camera. I was also able to get the 45mm f4 lens. Now this particular lens, in 35mm terms, is somewhere between 21 to 24mm, depending on how you do the conversion down to the 3:2 aspect ratio. But overall, it's a pretty solid lens, there's nothing majorly spectacular about it that I noticed. It renders pretty well, it's fairly sharp, it does a good job, It's a 45mm wide angle, it does exactly what it says on the tin. But in comparison to the 105, there's just no comparing them. So to wrap up this video and give my final thoughts on the camera, I actually don't like it that much. And I knew that before I borrowed this camera from my friends, that I wouldn't actually like the Pentax 6x7. And it's because it's just not the camera for me. It's in the same boat as the Mamiya or B67 that I used to own. I just didn't bond with it, I didn't gel with it. It felt like a chore to take this camera out. I've only shot 3 rolls for this, and I knew before I even shot them that I wasn't going to enjoy using it, and I really didn't. It's too big, it's too heavy, it's too awkward, and it's just not the camera for me. However, the idea of shooting a larger medium format neg does appeal to me quite a lot. Now this ideal camera of mine should be relatively light, relatively small and compact. Ideally it should shoot a nice large medium format frame, maybe something along the 6x9 size would be good. But where am I going to find a camera like that? Maybe this is it.